Okay, so welcome to today, part one of our Seed Saver series. I've talked a lot about seed saving in general, and I found that when I try to do like a seed saving basics, it seems like it's so much information that is kind of overwhelming. And so I've taken a new approach today. We'll know by the end if this was a successful approach. But it's also really built into the fact that this is like a multi-part series. And so this is just a real kind of a basic overview. So if you came with specific questions today, please feel free to ask those. I'm happy to dive in deeper either during the recording or after the presentation to something specific you might want to know about. But today is just kind of a general overview. So let's see how this works. So let's see here. Okay, well, sorry, the top is, I'm going to fix my settings here. But so today's topics is why save seeds? How reasonable or practical is it for you to save seeds at home? What does success look like? Different things to consider. Looking at some things that are easier or harder. I'll give you guys some takeaways that I think hopefully I was able to share with you for today. Couple tips for success, and I'll talk a little bit more about the upcoming classes and what I'm hoping to accomplish from there. Feel free, in the registration, my email was in there, and feel free to just reach out to me if you have ideas for other specific topics. One topic that is probably not something we're going to tackle in this 6-month series, or 5 months, I guess it is native plants. Native seeds can be really abundant, but in Southern California, a lot of native seeds are designed to go through some pretty extreme environmental conditions in order to sprout. So they may need exposure to smoke or fire or stratification, like extreme cold. They can be easy to save, but hard to start. This picture here is bladder pod seeds, and bladder pod seeds and buckwheat are also a couple that seem really easy to start. Bladder pod seems to start really well right underneath the plant. And so one way, if you want to know how easy, if you have something that has a lot of seeds in your garden and you've seen it go to seed before, if you never see the seeds pop up around that plant, that's an indication that it may need something more. And actually, the California Botanic Gardens has a really extensive publication on their website that talks about the different methods that they've tried, whether it's scoring the seed, where you sort of scratch the surface, or you expose it to gibberellic acid, so it's like going through the stomach, or some other kind of acid, like so it's going through the stomach of like an animal or something. But the bladder pod is one that you'll often find bladder pod sprouts right underneath the plant. And so once you get a bladder pod started, then maybe you let those sprout underneath the plant and then you move those pods. So anyways, native plants is not something that we're going to really cover too much in depth, just because they can be really challenging to start. But maybe on a future part, maybe in the fall or something, we'll talk about that. Okay. So why save seeds? You know, some people might want to save seeds for food security. I think in 2020 and early 2021, everybody was home and doing a lot of gardening, and there was a real shortage of seeds. And even though seeds have become prolific again, and I wouldn't even say there was a shortage of seeds, but there was a shortage of the ability to get seeds into the store fast enough. And so you often went to like hardware stores or nurseries, and the seed shelves were blank and or empty. And even though, you know, it's been replenished and we've gotten our seeds, and there may have been seeds at the seed growers, they just couldn't get to us fast enough. If you think about, you know, you only have to go back about 70 or 80 years till you get to a time when every community had a set of seeds. And, you know, not from like an apocalyptic point of view or an extremist point of view, but if you think about the number of, if like I'm in Highland right now, if you think about the number of people who are growing seeds in Highland right now, it's probably not that many people. So I do think there's like an element of food security to us having our own seed storage. And, also seeds and food are a really important part of our life and also an important part of our culture. And so having seeds that you've saved, either for sentimental reasons or for culinary reasons, I just really encourage people to get more engaged in that. Um, and another reason that some people like to save seeds is for the idea that those seeds are adapted to the local microclimate. And I put a question mark by a couple of these, like food security. If you were saving seeds from something like tomatoes, then, tomatoes can have hundreds of seeds per fruit and dozens of fruit per plant. And so you probably could feed all of Highland with the tomato seeds that you could grow. But something like lettuce, maybe, or well, that's not maybe a good example, but like broccoli, like we're not going to save the community in dire times, probably by the food seeds that we save at home. Maybe not so much because we haven't saved those seeds, but so many people have limited space to grow or limited knowledge with growing. So the food security element, I just put a question mark by, not because it's not relevant, but it has limitations, right? Another one, what I put a question mark is by something that's adapted to your local microclimate. And there is a lot of debate about that. If you are a seed grower commercially, they spend a huge amount of time making sure seeds are disease free, making sure that seeds are going to give you what you expect when you plant them. And a seed that's been chosen for the correct climate and microclimate at the right time of year should grow anywhere within that climate at the right time of year. So a lot of seed growers, I've had personal debates with someone from a large seed company. And, I understand their perspective that the right seed in the right place should absolutely grow and doesn't need to be adapted to your local microclimate. But I would add that if, it's been an especially hot year or an especially dry year, or there's some kind of unique conditions, it's been a windy year, and you've had a plant that's done incredibly well during those tough conditions, then it is possible by saving that seed and continuing to grow it out that maybe you are selecting for something that does better for your particular conditions or with changing conditions, with, maybe a plant that does really well with heavy winds in January. And, if you have 10 tomatoes, it's pretty common to see one of them that will kind of, or a couple of them that will do way better than maybe some other tomatoes. So I think that within reason, you definitely can save seeds that become adapted to your local microclimate. The other argument or discussion point around that is that, as the climate is changing, not to debate why the changes are occurring. I think everybody agrees that it is changing, or almost everybody, that, if every year our July is slightly hotter than the year before, if you're saving squash every year, that it may sort of also incrementally adjust. And there may be some soil factors that maybe have to do with your own backyard. Everybody has a different soil composition, a different mixture of silt, sand, and clay. And you may grow things that, are adapted to your local conditions. So I put a question mark there because I think there's two sides of that, but I think they're both very valid arguments. Also, if you think about what we've been doing for thousands or tens of thousands of years, we have been selecting for plants that we like. So if you look at corn from several thousand years ago, the kernel was very small. It was much more grain-like, and we've selected for nice, juicy kernels. And so maybe there's something about an eggplant that you grow or a broccoli that you grow that you really like. And maybe it's not what the traditional consumer really likes. I know that I can't remember which way it went, but usually people like asparagus that's nice and fat, and my grandma would like asparagus that was skinny, or vice versa. I'm not an asparagus eater, but what she liked wasn't what was commercially usually considered desirable. So maybe maybe you like a tomato with a really thick skin because you like to boil them and, like parboil them, peel the skin, dry the skin, powder it, and put it into soups. And so you want a really robust, thick skin or something like that. So you maybe are saving seeds that are adapted to something you, as a consumer of your produce, like. So I think that's where you over time can select for seeds that give you what you want, and it may not be what everybody else wants. Maybe you like bitterness in your whatever bell peppers or something, like you're craving that bitter bell pepper or something. You could limit water so that leads to bitterness, but maybe you just find one that just has the right taste. And then I think the other reason to save seeds, even if you do it kind of passively, is just to learn the whole process. Plants go through so often, when I became a master gardener, then the real focus was on the growing plant. And so it's often from a transplant to harvest or a transplant until it dies or something. And, not so much focus on that going to seed process. It's often when a flower or a plant looks like kind of ratty. And seed starting can be a little bit tricky. So it's just learning the whole process of plants too. So think about, I'd like to just sort of introduce, we're not getting super deep into like scientific topics today so much. It's just kind of giving you guys a reference point to sort of start. This is kind of when I look back on my journey about what I learned about seed saving. Today's goal is sort of like after the fact, what I realized the way that I learned the information and the things that sort of floated to the top. And there's a lot of elements, like seed saving is really complex. And so, seed saving company or seed companies will share all the information about seed saving. And it's like if you were, making your cheeseburger and it had the secret ingredient, you're not going to share the secret ingredient because people may make it at home. But these seed companies know full well, that they can tell you every single step and you still can't necessarily really easily reproduce it. So they are happy to share their special sauce because it is not super easy to save seed on a small scale. So let's look at a couple reasons. Any homeowner, or you don't have to be a homeowner, but any resident in like a property less than a few acres, unless you're dedicating all those acres to a crop, we're all considered small scale. So I have maybe 3/4 of an acre. I use, maybe a fifth of that to grow vegetables. That's extremely small scale. A lot of people are seed saving in a 3x10 plot or on plants that they grow in pots. So incredibly small scale. And with that small scale, then it is a lot harder to get plants to really be reproducible because of a number of things that we'll talk about. So the size of our plot makes seed saving on a small scale a little bit difficult. And with that comes the number of plants. So, an average person probably doesn't have 5,000 carrots that they actually let go to seed because maybe you want to eat that carrot. And once you let that carrot go to seed, that carrot is going to be, too tough to eat. So like with a squash, we're eating immature fruits. And with that squash and eating that immature fruit, then we lose the ability to save seeds from that squash. If you have 5,000 carrots that you're not planning on eating, I mean, that's what a seed grower is going to grow, like 5,000 carrots that they're not going to eat. I did see the other day, and it intrigued me online. Somebody posted that they take all their carrot tops and they replant them and let them go to seed. Never occurred to me. Don't know how effective that would be, but not off the table. It's something I might try. So, eggplant, we eat immature fruits. Squash, all the summer squash is immature fruits. So those are things that you just, if you're going to eat it, think about broccoli. We're eating an immature flower head. It usually never goes to flower. If we eat it, lettuce wouldn't usually go to flower. And like a head lettuce wouldn't go to flower because that's kind of like when it's gone to flower, it's tough. So a lot of these things we eat before the seed has a chance to form. The other thing is like, and I want to use the example of like a squash or like an eggplant is, um, if that squash pollinates within its own plant. So say you have some variety of zucchini and there's male and female flowers and the pollination all occurs on that one plant. Then if you eat one squash with its immature seeds and it is the best squash you ever had, or it withstands that summer heat, or it goes really well with like the type of soil you have. Sometimes by the time you eat it, like it may be too late, but if it's self-pollinated, then you know, you maybe can get other squash down the road. So maybe if you're thinking about saving seeds from something that you eat when the seeds are immature, then maybe consider letting one of those squash just stay on the vine through the whole season and letting it get big and letting those seeds mature. So that's another limitation is, do you eat that plant or let it go to seed? And if it turns out it's the best plant ever, have you harvested everything before you got a chance to let it go to seed? Like, what if you harvested all that squash and then you're like, wow, that was the best squash of the year, but you ate them all. So those are some things that make it challenging for summer or even cool season and just generally small scale seed saving. Some seeds are easier to save than others. We'll talk about that. And even if you don't have a ton of luck with saving seeds, I really just, when we talk about how reasonable it is or practical for you to save seeds at home, even if you don't have a ton of luck, I just encourage you to engage in the process. If you have young ones in your sphere, to engage them in the process. I don't think worldwide it is as true, but I think in a lot of quote unquote first world countries that the idea of seed saving is something that we've sort of relegated to somebody else to manage. And it really is a skill. It's not a skill lost worldwide, but definitely in America and definitely in a lot of developed countries, the idea of seed saving and just that knowledge is really getting lost. So even if you're not that good at it, like I really am good at knowing what I'm not good at, but I understand the process. And I've talked to my kids about the process. So I just think, sort of as I think if you're over 40, you probably had a grandparent who could probably sprout seeds and knew that process. But if you're younger than 40, you may not have had a grandparent who knew that. And so this is information, once it get lost, it's really hard to get back. And, people have been doing it for like thousands of years. So don't give up. If you have challenges, you can too. So I always like to say that I'm pretty sure that saving seeds, growing them and saving them and planting them and getting what you want, these are like two different hobbies. Like I just found these native sunflower or maybe not native sunflowers in my yard. I can harvest these all day long. These happen to be really easy to start, but there's some things that are really hard to start. So just because you save that seed, it doesn't mean that you can grow that seed or that that seed will give you what you want. And I swear they're really like two different hobbies. So just be patient with yourself. So what does success look like? And if feel free, you guys, usually if somebody unmutes, I can hear you guys. I know I'm chattering away, but I want to make sure I cover all the content. But if you guys have questions, feel free to unmute or put something in the chat. So what does success look like in seed saving? I think it really depends on what your goals are. Are you trying to, start your, Bob's Highland tomato empire? There was a tomato, there is a tomato called the Mortgage Lifter. And it was this guy who paid his mortgage with tomatoes. So maybe you are trying to start your own seed empire. And then your goals are going to be very different, than somebody who's just messing around. You're going to want to learn about that specific plant and you're going to want to really focus on getting that seed to be reproducible. Maybe you want to be able to be sort of self-sustainable or independent where you can grow crops and then save seeds and regrow those crops. Seeds aren't super expensive, but it all adds up. And, I think a lot of people desire to be able to grow stuff, save the seed, and regrow it. And with that, you again want something to be reproducible. Maybe you just want to save seeds because you want to be, better understand plants and be part of the process. I was really great. These peas that I have in the picture here, these were so much fun, so easy to save seeds from. I think I saved seeds from them for 5 years. Every year, the plant produced less and less peas until the final year when it made these beautiful vines and didn't flower and didn't make any fruit. I had bred fertility, I guess, or I bred sterility into my seeds. And so it would make a plant. But I had a great time. It was a 5 year adventure. I learned a lot. I'm still not exactly sure what I did wrong because plant peas should be self-fertile, but I bred the fertility out of those peas. And so I had these beautiful vines by the end of 5 years. And so I still had a great time. And the kids planted with me, and we were all part of the process, and we had a good laugh each year. I think the second to last year, it made like 2 peas. And so, who knows what happens, but I have some ideas. I see a question, hand raised. Do you want to unmute?
Hi, yeah. Your story about breeding the fertility out of the peas, I find that interesting because I've heard on occasion, I mean, I've never tried it myself because I have a very small yard, and I'm here in Highland too, by the way.
Oh,
But um I've heard of people seeding avocado, taking their avocado seeds and growing trees, and those trees never producing anything. And I'm wondering if that's along the same line as what you've said about the peas, or do there need to be, is that something that needs to be cross-pollinated? I don't know a lot about um, producing fruits and
that's
vegetables.
that's a great question. So when it comes to fruit trees, there are two challenges with growing plants from seed. And one challenge unrelated to the seed itself is that a lot of fruit trees are grafted where they have a rootstock and an upper part of the plant that the rootstock is grown for hardiness and the upper part of the plant is grown for flavor. So a lot of times when you are able to get those plants to grow from seed, they can just sort of like suddenly fail for what appears to be no reason because they're susceptible to nematodes or to some sort of common soil-borne pathogen. But citrus and avocados are two that, easy to get seeds. I see the avocado craft pushed everywhere and it drives me bananas because avocado seeds are, if you think about all the pollinators that visit avocados and citrus, then, if you think about every plant, the fruit on it is going to match the parent, but the seed is a composition of the pollen that it gets when it's pollinated. So most of those avocados do never produce fruit. And without spending too much time on like the genetics, they're just basically like they're gonna make an avocado tree. And every once in a while I hear, and like I know a lot of people who have connections in Mexico or grew up in Mexico, they grow a lot more citrus and avocado from seed. And so they have success, but that has to do with the variety. And if you have an avocado that does well from seed and there's 50 of them or a bunch of them, then it's very likely it's going to get pollinated by other avocados of the same type. And so if you kind of think of like a horse and a donkey create a mule that cannot create anything else. There's genetics involved in sort of creating sterility. And with citrus, very often when you get citrus seeds, it will grow a citrus tree. It will often die in the first like 3 to 5 years for these other reasons about it not being super hardy. But it's been pollinated by so many things that those seeds just don't have the genetics to make that. So like citrus, like they have that parent navel in Riverside, where it is the original navel from the 1880s, that is the parent of all navel oranges. And so citrus is grown through cuttings to reproduce the plant material of the tree that it came off of. So yeah, it is not a failure of the person who sprouted it. They're essentially going to be ornamental avocados. That's very typical with citrus, very typical with peaches. Peach pits will fall and be very fertile, but very rarely produce. They'll produce a peach that will flower, but often they just stay like the size of a quarter or a nickel. They'll be very hard. The one tree that seems in the fruit tree world that seems to be a little bit more successful is like old varieties of apples. So I know a lot more people who have been successful with apple seeds. So I always tell people when they're starting that journey, you're looking at 3 to 7 years before you get any fruit. When you buy a fruit tree from a commercial organization, then that rootstock and tree may only be quote unquote 3 years old. But if it's a cutting, the bud wood could be 10, 15, 7, many years older and at maturity, like, fruiting maturity, sexual maturity for a tree. Um, and so if you have a graft where you have a rootstock, maybe the rootstock is 3 or 4 years old, and maybe the cutting is many, many more years older than that and already at fruiting maturity. So if you buy a commercial fruit tree, then that fruit tree will usually start producing within a couple fruits in the first or second year, but usually you don't really see fruit production for 7 years. When you're starting something from seed, you're probably looking closer to 10 years. So I always tell people, if you've got space in your yard and you want to do an experiment, but you're probably looking at, 7 to 10 years before you know if it's just an ornamental tree. And so, yeah, love that question because we always get that. So I just tell people, if you want to experiment, go for it, but do not, plan on paying your mortgage off with those avocados because it's very unlikely, that you will get a good fruit set. Doesn't mean it can't happen. But that's just what it is that the pollination hasn't been adequate to make a viable tree. So
Thank-
great question.
Yeah, thank you for that. So yeah.
Absolutely. Spread the word, not the avocado seed or because it just drives me crazy. I just saw somebody and their dog likes avocados. And then he takes a picture. It was really cute. He takes a picture of the dog eating the avocado, spitting out the seed. He starts the avocado seed, and then he gives the little trees away with a picture of the dog cleaning that particular seed. I'm like, that is so cute, but you got to couch it with the fact that who knows what this is going to give you. And maybe it's just going to be a shade tree. Maybe that's all you want in your life. So yeah.
I'll,
um,
I'll I'll test this out when I've got bigger property.
There you go. Exactly. Exactly. And that goes to my last bullet point on depending on the goals. Maybe it's just having fun with the process. Avocados are really, we put some toothpicks in, you put them in some water, they make an avocado, except for the fact that avocados really break really easily. And with our wind, I'm like not feeling that. Just have fun with the process, spend your whole life starting citrus seeds and see what you get. Maybe you're going to come up with the next best thing. And apples would be, if anybody wants to do fruit trees, I would say apples are probably your most likely, bet on success. So, and I think the traditional understanding of seed saving success is one, and this goes back to your comment or question, one, that the seed grows. So that means it germinates. Another term is it's viable. And the other thing is the seed gives you what you expect. So with an avocado, very likely that seed will germinate. Those seeds are tough. Um, but will it give you what you expect? With a lettuce, you got a 3-month window and you're like, darn, that didn't work. But with an avocado, you're looking at 7 to 10 years before you're like, darn, that didn't work. So traditional understanding of seed saving success, if you're not just messing around, is that the seed grows, so it germinates or is viable, and that it gives you what you expect. And that term is usually like breeding true or true to type. Okay. So let's think of the elements to consider for success.
Maggie,
Uh,
I'm so sorry. I have a quick question.
Absolutely.
So, if I'm understanding correctly, I have pumpkins that I grew, but based on the seed saving that you've talked about so far, should I have left the pumpkins on the vine until the end of the season? Because I, of course, took them off right around Halloween, and then cut a couple just recently to get the seeds out of them to start planting for spring.
No, so
So,
you're good because pumpkins, so all the squash, it took me a long time to figure out what winter and summer squash is. And summer squash is
oh,
just basically immature um cucurbids. So it's in the cucurbit family, and it is, so the summer ones we're eating when they're soft and immature, and the winter ones are hard skinned, and those seeds are mature. So I don't know the genetics behind what you're going to get, but those seeds were mature when you harvested them, because like when you harvest squash, you don't wait till the vine dries. You want to harvest them when
Uh-huh.
they're sort of like pierceable by your thumb. But when you're harvesting pumpkins, you usually let the vine dry. And as long as those seeds were hard, then usually we're harvesting like Halloween pumpkins or fall pumpkins are mature fruit. So you're good to go
Okay.
there. You're good. You don't
And
know what
then
the
one more
genetics
question
are
on
going to
that.
be.
No, of course not. But how many years could I keep pumpkin seeds? Or any seeds
Um,
for that matter?
yeah, we'll talk a little bit about that at the end, but the short answer is you're much more likely to have success if you grow out every year.
Oh,
And
okay.
if you try to save them. So like most commercial seed companies will grow out every year, every other year. Sometimes what they'll do is they will grow out half one year and half the other year in case like a wave of squirrels comes through or something. So
Mm.
I would try to grow them out as annually as possible, and I would also maybe hold half in case you have a failed season. But you know, they find 800-year-old seeds that they can still sprout. It really just depends on if the conditions were right, you know, not exposed to mold and moisture. And so if you keep them in a cool, dry place, they can last for a long time, but viability does, or the ability to sprout or germinate does go down over time. It depends not only on the plant family, but on the variety itself, and the conditions they were stored in. So I would say, you know, if you're trying to start your pumpkin empire, then I would grow out at least half of them every season, every year, if you can. And I would
Awesome.
save
Okay.
half, and you know, it's just in case you have a failed year. So we
Awesome.
had this we had this garden in Rialto where they had this really amazing squash, which nobody knew where it came from, but it would come up on its own with no additional water. It was really delicious. It was probably like an Italian squash. I think it was from an older garden member who had actually passed away. And so we were saving those seeds. And one year, the people who were saving them tried to go large scale and plant them all, and they got taken out by gophers. And so then
Oh no.
sort of, yeah, so then they were sort of like, hey, does anybody have any more of the Joe's seeds? And so that's a reason to save a couple just in case. But then you would grow those out the next year, hopefully. And so you would sort of alternate. So every year you're growing out like half of your stash. Okay.
I see. Okay. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Okay, so just like, you know, this is kind of where we get into stuff that's going to be covered over the next 5 classes. So I just really want you to just kind of start thinking about this. And if you don't want to wait for the upcoming classes, then I'll give you a couple resources where you can do your own research. But the elements to consider for success. Did it have what it needed to make a viable seed? Basically, did it make a viable embryo? Carrots take a couple plants to grow, and they also take 2 seasons or a year and a half to grow, so 2 summers. And I saved one carrot in a community. I was a school garden, and I was so excited, and it flowered and it looked like it made seeds. But when you touch those seed heads, they were hollow. And then when I backtracked and actually did my research, it takes like at least 5 carrots to make viable seeds. So I had not created a viable embryo. So that's the first step. Did it had what it need to produce offspring? And so not only is it viable, but is it sterile or is it fertile? And that was kind of goes back to the discussion that we had about avocados. And so I won't spend too much time on that, but basically, you know, this is when we talk about like plant breeding, which I think maybe the next one or the following one. Then we're going to be talking about a very basic overview of what goes into that. And so this second point right here is really at the heart of kind of where it goes wrong if you don't get what you expect from a seed you plant, like that avocado. So it's really this second one is really, and it kind of goes into this third point, which is, did it get pollinated in a way that will give you what you expect? So it might be identical to the parent, and we'll talk more about this next time, but it can be genetically identical, which is very hard to do on a small scale. So if you had a Better Boy tomato, you needed a lot of Better Boy tomatoes and no other tomatoes around to get a genetically matched seed. And then there's always some genetic variation, just like there is in people. But then, like with herbs, there's been research that shows that, like when you save from cilantro or basil, that genetically it doesn't match the parent, but the plant looks the same. So there's like genetic identity, like identical, like genetic match. And then there's what they call phenotypic match, which is like, what does it look like? So a phenotype, if you think about eyes, you know, you got blue eyes and brown eyes, for example, and a blue eye is a recessive gene and a brown eye is a dominant gene. And so like my mom had blue eyes and my dad had brown eyes. I have blue eyes and my kids have brown eyes. So genetically, I have the I've got the genes to make a, well, I guess my dad there, this is where we need the chart. We need the old, you know, the Mendel's peas, the square, right? But so my mom had blue eyes, so she must have had both recessive. And then my dad had a brown eye dominant gene and he had a blue eye recessive gene. So their offspring had blue eyes. And then my children's father had brown eyes. So my children do have a blue eye recessive gene, but what they showed was a brown eye dominant gene. And so you may have a basil, which doesn't genetically match its parent, but it still pretty much tastes the same. So what kind of pollination, that's what we'll talk about next time, is how do you kind of get reproducibility of what you want? And you might be looking to crossbreed things like broccolini is not baby broccoli. I was going to put a picture of kalettes. Broccolini is a cross between, I think, broccoli and maybe kale. And kalettes are little mini kales. So imagine a Brussels sprout, but on the Brussels sprout, it's got little baby kales. And it's a cross between a Brussels sprout and a kale. So you may want crossbreeding if you're trying to pay your mortgage with the seed that you're saving off. I'm creating the next best culinary thing. But controlling that pollination, I have a presentation called Pollination Traffic Control. And so one presentation that we'll talk about is looking at the genetics. And then the next one is how do you control that? And then if you did get something that you liked, is it a hybrid? Like an early girl is a tough skinned, good flavored tomato, but it is a hybrid. So every early girl tomato you buy is a hybrid. And a lot of people say that the seeds produce something that looks very similar to an early girl tomato, but genetically it is not because it's a hybrid, a cross of two different genetic parents. So again, it's that blue-eyed and brown-eyed. So with the Mendel's peas, you had the white pea and the purple pea, and when you cross them, you got 3 purple peas and 1 white pea. And then if you cross them again, you know, you have that like Punnett square, I think it is. And so that's where it's like when you're talking about hybrids, and hybridization is not the same as GMOs. It's not something that's been genetically modified. It's just something like a blue-eyed parent and a brown-eyed parent. So hybridization occurs in nature, but maybe something that you want to seed save from because it was the best bell pepper you ever had. It may be the result of a hybrid. Again, the plant on the fruit will match, but maybe when you bought that plant at the nursery, that was actually a hybrid. So the seeds may not match. It may come up with some genes from the auntie or the uncle way back when that may not give you what you want. So this is something to consider when you don't get what you want. It's probably, or what you expect. It's probably due to genetics. And unfortunately, you may get something you love and still not be able to reproduce it. And then, you know, understanding the plant breeding and the genetics is kind of where that's for me like the biggest learning curve in all of this. Understanding that well enough to reproduce it reliably is where I think you're going to spend, if you really want to go down the seed saving rabbit hole, that's where you're going to spend a lot of time. And so do you know how to get there again if you got it? But I want to add that there's a whole concept, and if you're really into seed saving and want to do some research, look up landrace seeds. And the idea is that say you had 2, you know, I'll use the term heirloom, and heirloom just means something that's been grown for many years by seeds. It's not a hybrid. And it's been grown for many years. And it is not genetically selected for a certain number of characteristics. It's sort of like a wild variety, if you will. But if you look up landrace seeds, they talk about if you keep selecting even a wild seed for long enough, you winnow out genetic diversity. And so there's I think the guy was talking about, look up landrace seeds if you're interested in this concept. But basically it's like you just if you find that favorite squash that is like the best ever and you really try to isolate those genetics, you then create the same genetic narrowness or genetic weakness that comes with like the whole reason that people try to grow like open pollinated heirloom or older variety seeds. So maybe instead of trying to get that exact squash genetics, maybe you're just looking for a yellow squash with a crookneck. So if you're interested in that concept, it's something you kind of have to like, I can read it and understand it. And then when I try to replicate the information, it's something I'm still working to understand, but check it out. Really interesting concept. So I just have a chart next, which has some easier and harder seeds to save some. We've got about seeds to save from. We've got about 10 minutes and then I've got to run, but I want to make sure I just cover these last few ideas. So some seeds that are easier or harder to save from and why. So easier seeds are seeds that you can get seeds from the first year. They're not a biennial. So like a carrot or an onion is a biennial, meaning that it takes 2 years, but it's not 2 years. It's like, so the carrot will make a green growth the first year, then it will die back, and then it will make a green growth with a flower the next year. So it really is like 18 months or something like that, but it's not going to give you, so it's 2 seasons. And then the other thing that makes a plant easy is if it just doesn't crossbreed easily. So you have, should have put a picture, but we'll talk about that on the genetics. So you have perfect flowers or complete flowers, which have a male and a female part. So like a tomato has a male and a female part, and that tomato will fertilize itself. A pea is a perfect flower. It will fertilize itself. You have some that are partially perfect or partially complete where, well, we'll go into this later, but basically you can have male and female flowers on the same plant, like an avocado, where it has male and female flowers. So an avocado could be self-fertile, but the male and female flowers are open at different times of the day, so that you need another avocado to help increase production. Squash has male and female flowers, and they're often open at different times, and it's a genetic or evolutionary, it's intentional by the evolution of the plant, so that the plant doesn't become inbred and weak, and that the male flowers will fertilize the female on another plant. And so those can be maybe a little bit more tricky, but also leads to more like crossbreeding. Think about a corn. The corn stalk fruit is a female part, and then it has the tassels. And it really is designed not to fertilize its own plant. It's designed to fertilize another corn down the street. And so crossbreeding occurs very easily. Things that make it harder, again, that it is not ready in one season. So you have to make space in your bed for like 2 years. Some plants really crossbreed very easily. And so your genetics, like broccoli, like the Seed Library of Los Angeles was an amazing seed library. I'm not sure if they're still open, but they would say that they wouldn't save or share broccoli seeds because it was too hard to get them to breed true because too many people in the neighborhood were growing broccoli. Then there was this community garden in Montclair, and they saved broccoli like crazy, but it's because nobody else was growing broccoli in the neighborhood, and so there wasn't any crossbreeding going on. And then some plants need a lot of other plants. You know, you need your 5,000 carrots to get a good seed, and others just need 1 tomato. And then location is a factor. If you're in a community garden and trying to grow something that crossbreeds even a little bit easily, like a bell pepper, if other people are growing other kinds of bell peppers and the pollinators are moving around the garden, you can't control what's in other people's plots. And we'll talk about that in pollination traffic control, because there are some things you can do. But also just, do you have a lot of space to dedicate some to seed saving? And we'll talk more about that in future presentations. So also make sure that seeds must be mature. And so, weed seeds, like not marijuana, but like weeds, those seeds are viable. Even if they're green, they can dry and still be viable. But make sure that your seeds are mature. I think this slide is not where I thought it was. I think I moved it around on accident. Sorry about that. But just to note, wet seeds are seeds in fleshy fruits. The fruit must be mature. We've already talked about that many of the vegetables that we eat in the summer are immature. So are peas. Peas are immature. So if we want them, then we need to let them dry on the fruit. I mean, on the tree, on the vine. And dry seeds are ones that are not in a fleshy fruit, and they should dry on the plant. And you also want to watch out for molds and stuff to develop. Yeah, that wasn't where I thought. What happened to my other slide? Okay, I don't know what happened. Okay, yeah, well, I totally lost control of the situation here. I'm going to move it before I forget. Then we'll go back to it. Okay, so easier or harder seeds. Here's my list. Herbs, you can usually get seeds pretty easily from herbs. I have C and W here. C stands for cool season. W stands for warm season. So if something is cool and warm season, they can grow equally well in the cool and warm season for the most part. If something has an asterisk next to the W, it's something that maybe needs like a little bit of protection from the summer heat. But herbs, tomatoes, lettuce, peas and beans, most cucurbits, your squashes, your melons, your zucchini, your pumpkins, those are pretty easy to seed save from. Some flowers like sweet peas, alyssum, nasturtium, very easy to seed save from. And then the ones that are easy can also be invasive. So fennel is on the hit list. I think one of the Channel Islands has either a dill or fennel outbreak where it's just like it's so prolific that you got to be careful. So it's not really a problem if you catch those seeds, but if you're not like managing your seeds well, some of these ones that are quote unquote easy, epizote is banned from some community gardens because it seeds so well that it becomes invasive. Dill, amaranth is another one that can become really problematic. Mint is commonly problematic in the garden. And although mint will make a lot of seeds, it usually starts from runners and not from seeds. So it's problematic not from the seeds, but because of the runners that it will send out. Things that can be harder for the reasons we talked about, because they crossbreed easily. They may need more time in the garden. You may need more of them, are brassicas. So that's all your kale, broccoli, kohlrabi, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, everything in the brassica family crossbreeds really well with each other, which is problematic, or you get something new and fun. Onions and carrots take a couple seasons and need several plants. Bell peppers crossbreed fairly easily. Corn crossbreeds fairly easily. So anything that needs a larger isolation distance to breed true or give you what you want is something that's going to be harder. Anything that needs to be in the ground for more than one season will give you a little bit more trouble if you have limited space. And anything that you eat before it goes to seed. So think about your lettuce heads, think about your broccoli and cauliflower. Like you're eating the immature seeds in broccoli and cauliflower. So unless you let part of the plant go to seed, you're not getting them. But one of the cool things is if it gets warm and they go to seed, well, there you go. Your squash, your cucumbers, those are immature. Your eggplants, those are all immature plants that we're eating. So those are some things that make it more difficult. I've got a few wrap-up slides. We talked about wet and dry seeds. So for cleaning and storage, we'll talk more about that at future presentations, but you basically just want to remove excess material so that, because excess like plant material, they call it chaff, or the fleshy parts of the plant, that can bring in molds and mildews that can damage the seed. Get them kind of as clean as you want them to. Like sometimes, I will Google what the seed looks like if I haven't bought it in a packet before, and see what it looks like commercially and try to get it that clean. And we'll talk about seed cleaning at upcoming presentations. It's pretty, if you're old enough to know who MacGyver is, it's pretty MacGyverish, where you sort of, even commercial companies invent their random methods. So it takes innovation and lots of fun information out there about that. With some flower seeds, I have seen so many people save flower seeds and there's no seed there. Sometimes the seed head has like fallen away, or the seed itself has fallen, and they're saving the flower and the chaff around the seed, but they're actually like the seed is not there. So like with marigolds, I had to like do an internet search on what the seed actually looked like to confirm what I was trying to save. So that's especially true with flowers. You want to store them in a cool place. It doesn't need to be cold. You're not a seed bank where you're stopping something mid-growth. A seed bank will remove excess humidity so that that seed will not break. If you think about putting a soda in a freezer and it expands, the liquid expands as it freezes. If there's moisture in your seeds, it will expand and it can damage the embryo. And refrigerators have a lot of variability in moisture. So a cool place, a dry place, I'm not a fan of the fridge, although some people do successfully use that. And I wouldn't recommend the freezer unless you can make sure there's no humidity in the seed. So if you don't have like a scientific, like a hood where you can control humidity, it's really impossible, pretty well, very difficult to do. So I'd stay away from the freezer, cool, dry place, keep pests, bugs, and vertebrates out. And then best to plant them. We already talked about that, where you're doing plant some each year and rotate so that because the seed viability will go down over time. I'll just have a few more things. I know it's 1 o'clock, but the takeaways from today, you want to understand why the seeds that you save, I'm hoping this is not what you guys are taking away. I'm hoping you guys took this away. I want you guys to maybe just have a fundamental or not fundamental, a basic understanding of why seeds that you save, like those avocados, like those squash, why they may or may not give you what you want. So really just food for thought on that, and just start pondering that. If you've done any seed saving, think back to what worked and what didn't. And it probably had to do with the pollination and the genetics or the crossbreeding. I want you to know, like for harvesting, make sure your seeds are ripe. So on a fleshy fruit, that fruit needs to be ripe. So a cucumber is not ripe. It is ripe for our consumption, but it is not, I guess I shouldn't say ripe, I should say mature. So that, if think about a cucumber that you've forgotten on a vine and those seeds are very hard. I always try to think about what does the seed look like in a packet? And if you think about if you cut into a good cucumber, if that seed looks like the seed from a cucumber packet, like we're not eating that. That's a tough cucumber. Same thing with eggplant, right? We're eating immature seeds. So if you are saving seeds from a fruit, make sure that that fruit is mature. And then also to start learning where seeds can come from on the plant. These are radish seeds. They did not come from where I thought they came from. They're on the stalk, and the flower, have a little tiny flower cluster, but it will expand, and they essentially look like peas in a pod. They're really cool, but it's not what I expected. So learn where you can find those seeds on the plant. Learn how to, kind of know the basics of cleaning, which is to remove the fleshy material and chaff and to store them in a cool, dry, pest-free place. And kind of know the things that you might have to consider when it comes to planting future seed-saving gardens. So this is, we always share university research as master gardeners. But one of the things that's really interesting about seed saving is on the university level, seed saving is often, the research is geared toward commercial growers. So if you want to find research about carrots, then you're going to go to like a carrot researcher, and they're going to tell you everything about commercial carrot production from seed or commercial carrot seed production. But really hard to find a list of average garden crops. So Seed Savers Exchange, I'm not promoting them as a business. They do sell seeds, but they have this amazing guide that I'll share in the chat, and I'll show you the resources and where you can find them on our website. This is like the go-to guide, and a lot of researchers cite this guide as being pretty reliable. And we're going to talk more all about this guide at upcoming presentation on the genetics of seed saving. Okay, so this guide is amazing. I'll show you where to find it. And this is kind of the go-to for the small scale seed saver. So the upcoming topics, we talked about Seed Saving 101. In March, we're going to talk about plant breeding basics. So these columns about species, family, life cycle, primary pollination method, recommended isolation distance, population size. This will essentially be next month's topic, all about this. Then we'll talk about pollination traffic control. So once you understand all of these factors, we're going to talk about how you can control it. In May, I'm going to give you guys kind of an outline for planning your summer seed saving garden and give you sort of like the top 10 characters in a summer garden, you know, tomatoes, squash, you know, pumpkins, corn, peppers, and just kind of give you guys a breakdown of what's easier, what's harder, what to consider. And you'll understand more about that after the April presentation in pollination traffic control, because you'll understand what you need to maybe help, what you need to prevent, what you need to encourage, that kind of thing. And then in June, we'll talk about saving the seeds from your summer seeds. And so we'll talk about cleaning wet seeds. Both cucumbers and tomatoes need to go through a fermentation process to get a really good clean seed. So that is the plan. So a few tips. Learn your families. That guide I showed you back here, look at the families. You know, I wouldn't focus too much on the species, but if you're really interested in seed saving, I'd print up this guide and I'd start studying your families. That's really going to help you to understand the crossbreeding. And one thing that can help is if you are organizing your seeds, consider organizing them by family so you can be sort of more like, you know, off the top of your mind, what's going to crossbreed with something else. And just start somewhere. If you see seeds outside right now, go ahead and save them. Plant them, you know, if it's something you can plant right now, plant them right now and see what comes up. An herb, plant them right now and see what comes up. And then just make a goal to start with something easy and start with something that's in season. Lettuce could be a good one to start with right now. If you've got any lettuce growing, let a couple of them grow to flower. Those ones are, you got to catch them because they're kind of like a dandelion and they're going to blow away, but let them dry on your plant. And they're a great winter seed to start from, or maybe consider saving from peas. And then just be patient with yourself. It's a journey, not a destination. People have done it for thousands of years, and you can too. So I'm going to go out of presentation mode. I'm going to pull these resources out of this presentation and drop them in the chat. You can also find these resources if you go to our website, then Master Gardener website, then there is a section resource sheets under recent presentations, and under recent presentations, under the resource sheets, there is the Seed Saver series pollination traffic control, and that's all the resources that I shared with you. And this is what the seed saving guide looks like. It's 5 pages of just like fabulous information. So if you want to do some prep work for next month's class, start studying this guide. Bring your questions, and this is what we're going to go through and really dive in deep next month. Follow us on social media if you want to know more about upcoming activities and where we're at and what we're up to. And here is our helpline information. So with that, if anybody has a question they think they want to be recorded, because everybody wants to know it, feel free to ask any questions. I have a meeting I've got to drive to in 8 minutes. So I have just a short amount of time, but I don't see any questions. Anybody unmuting? Okay, well, thanks so much for joining. I'm going to stop the recording. If anybody had a question they wanted to ask offline, happy to take those too. And thanks so much for joining, and we'll see you next month. And if you want to share this with somebody, I'll be posting it on YouTube probably by the end of today. Okay, thanks so much. Take
Thanks,
care.
Maggie. Thank you.